The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ashworth Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors where Queen Isabella stood reading the financial report that would change everything. Her hands trembled slightly as she absorbed the numbers on the page, each figure representing another piece of evidence in what was becoming the most serious crisis the monarchy had faced in decades. The document detailed secret offshore accounts, hidden transactions, and a web of financial dealings that led directly to her daughter-in-law, Princess Elena. For months, whispers had circulated through the palace corridors about Elena's expensive lifestyle, her frequent shopping trips to Paris and Milan, and the mysterious benefactors who seemed to fund her every whim. Now, those whispers had crystallized into cold, hard evidence. Isabella set the report down on her mahogany desk and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. Below, gardeners tended to the rose beds that had bloomed for over 3 centuries, their careful work a reminder of the continuity and tradition that she was sworn to protect. The monarchy had survived wars, scandals, and political upheavals, but this threat came from within, making it far more dangerous than any external enemy. The investigation had begun 6 months earlier when the Royal Treasury noticed discrepancies in certain charitable accounts. What started as routine auditing had uncovered a sophisticated scheme involving shell companies, fake charities, and foreign bank accounts. The trail led investigators across 3 countries and through a maze of financial instruments designed to hide the true source and destination of millions of pounds. Crown Prince Alexander, Elena's husband and Isabella's eldest son, had been completely unaware of his wife's activities. The revelation had devastated him, not just because of the betrayal, but because of what it meant for the future of the crown. Alexander had always been the responsible one, the prince who understood duty and sacrifice. His marriage to Elena 5 years earlier had been celebrated as a modern fairy tale, a union between old nobility and new money that seemed to bridge different worlds. Elena had come from a wealthy business family with interests in technology and real estate. Her father, Marcus Thornfield, had built an empire from nothing, and Elena had grown up surrounded by luxury and privilege. When she met Alexander at a charity gala, their romance had captured public imagination. She was beautiful, intelligent, and seemed genuinely committed to royal duties and charitable work. The wedding had been a spectacular affair watched by millions around the world. Elena had worn a tiara that belonged to Alexander's great-grandmother, and her vows had spoken of service, duty, and love for both her husband and the people of their kingdom. The public adored her, and, for the first few years of marriage, she had performed her royal duties with apparent enthusiasm and grace. But, beneath the public image, Elena had been building a secret life funded by money that didn't belong to her. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. Using her position as patron of various charities, Elena had established fake organizations that existed only on paper. These phantom charities received donations from legitimate sources, including government grants and private donors who believed they were supporting worthy causes. The money would then be transferred through a series of shell companies before ending up in Elena's personal accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. She used these funds to maintain a lifestyle that went far beyond what even a princess could reasonably afford. Private jets to fashion shows, million-pound jewelry purchases, and investments in luxury properties around the world, all funded by money intended for children's hospitals, environmental protection, and education programs. The palace's chief financial officer, Sir Richard Pemberton, had been the first to notice irregularities. A meticulous man who had served the royal family for over 20 years, Sir Richard prided himself on knowing where every penny went. When quarterly reports showed unusual patterns in charitable giving, he began asking questions that no one wanted to answer. Initial inquiries were met with explanations that seemed reasonable on the surface. Elena's staff claimed that new accounting procedures were being implemented, that technology updates had temporarily disrupted normal reporting, and that all irregularities would be resolved within a few weeks. But Sir Richard's suspicions only grew stronger when those weeks turned into months with no resolution. Acting on his own authority, Sir Richard hired a private investigation firm that specialized in financial fraud. The investigators, led by former Scotland Yard detective Sarah Morrison, approached the case with the methodical precision that had made Morrison one of the most respected investigators in Europe. What they discovered was a scheme so audacious and well-planned that it had operated successfully for over 3 years without detection. The fake charities had professional websites, official-looking documentation, and even staged events that were photographed and reported in society magazines. Elena had been careful to ensure that her phantom organizations appeared legitimate to casual observation. She had hired actors to pose as charity workers, rented office spaces for single-day photoshoots, and even organized fake award ceremonies where she received recognition for her charitable work. But the digital trail told a different story. Bank records showed money flowing from legitimate charities into accounts controlled by shell companies registered in countries with strict banking privacy laws. These companies had no real business operations, no employees, and no purpose other than to move money from one account to another until it eventually reached Elena's personal accounts. The investigation also revealed that Elena had been receiving assistance from her father's business associates, who provided expertise in international finance and helped establish the complex web of companies and accounts that made the scheme possible. This connection raised additional questions about whether Elena's family had been aware of her activities and whether they had profited from the stolen funds. As the evidence mounted, Sir Richard faced one of the most difficult decisions of his career. Exposing the scheme would create a scandal that could damage the monarchy for generations, but allowing it to continue would make the royal family complicit in fraud. After weeks of internal debate, he made the decision to present his findings directly to Queen Isabella, knowing that the information would force her to take action that would tear her family apart. The meeting between Sir Richard and the Queen took place in her private study on a grey October morning. For 2 hours, Sir Richard methodically presented bank statements, transaction records, and documentary evidence that painted a picture of systematic fraud and betrayal. Queen Isabella listened in silence, her expression growing more grave with each revelation. When Sir Richard finished his presentation, the Queen asked only one question: "How certain are you of these findings?" His response was unequivocal: "Your Majesty, the evidence is overwhelming. Princess Elena has stolen millions of pounds from charitable organizations and has been living a double life funded by fraud." The Queen dismissed Sir Richard and spent the rest of the day alone, contemplating the impossible choice before her. Elena was not just her daughter-in-law, she was the mother of Princess Sophie, Isabella's beloved granddaughter. Taking action against Elena would mean destroying her son's marriage, traumatizing her granddaughter, and creating a public scandal that would dominate headlines for months. But the Queen also understood that her primary duty was to the institution of the monarchy and to the people who trusted the royal family to act with integrity and honor. The stolen money had been intended for genuinely needy causes: hospitals that needed equipment, schools that required funding, and environmental programs that protected the kingdom's natural resources. Elena's fraud had directly harmed the very people that the monarchy was supposed to serve. That evening, Queen Isabella called Crown Prince Alexander to request a private meeting. She chose her words carefully when she told him that there were serious concerns about Elena's financial activities that required immediate discussion. Alexander agreed to meet the following morning, unaware that the conversation would change his life forever. The prince arrived at his mother's study expecting a routine discussion about royal duties or upcoming events. Instead, he found himself confronted with evidence that his wife had been living a lie for years. Queen Isabella presented the findings with the same methodical precision that Sir Richard had used, watching as her son's expression changed from confusion to disbelief to heartbreak. Alexander's first reaction was denial. He insisted that there must be some mistake, that Elena would never do such a thing, and that the evidence must have been misinterpreted. But, as Queen Isabella presented document after document, bank record after bank record, the undeniable truth began to sink in. The woman he loved and trusted had been systematically stealing money and lying to him every single day of their marriage. The revelation was particularly devastating because Alexander had always prided himself on his judgment of character. As heir to the throne, he had been trained to evaluate people carefully, to see beyond surface appearances, and to understand the motivations that drove human behavior. The fact that he had been completely deceived by someone so close to him shook his confidence in his ability to lead and protect the monarchy. Questions that had never occurred to him suddenly demanded answers. How many of Elena's charitable events had been genuine? Which of their friends and associates had been part of the deception? How much of their seemingly happy marriage had been built on lies? Alexander found himself questioning not just Elena's actions, but his own memories and perceptions of the past 5 years. Queen Isabella watched her son struggle with the implications of Elena's betrayal and felt her heart break for him. But she also knew that sentiment could not be allowed to override duty. The monarchy's survival depended on maintaining the trust of the people, and that trust could only be preserved through decisive action. Elena's titles and privileges would have to be removed, and the full extent of her crimes would have to be revealed to the public. The meeting between mother and son lasted until well past midnight, as they discussed the legal, financial, and public relations aspects of the crisis. Lawyers would need to be consulted, law enforcement would need to be notified, and a strategy would need to be developed for managing the inevitable media storm. But, before any of those practical matters could be addressed, Alexander would need to confront Elena directly. The conversation that would end Elena's royal career and destroy Alexander's marriage was scheduled for the following afternoon. As Queen Isabella prepared for bed that night, she wondered whether the monarchy would emerge from this crisis stronger or whether Elena's betrayal would inflict permanent damage on an institution that had endured for nearly 1,000 years. The next few days would determine not just Elena's fate, but the future of the crown itself. Princess Elena entered the blue drawing room at precisely 3 o'clock, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floor with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. She had chosen her outfit carefully that morning, a navy Chanel dress that conveyed both elegance and respect for royal protocol, paired with sapphire earrings that had been a wedding gift from Alexander's grandmother. The irony of wearing stolen luxury to face accusations of theft was lost on her. Crown Prince Alexander stood by the fireplace, his back to the door as Elena entered. The formality of the setting, a room normally reserved for state functions, should have warned her that this was not a routine marital conversation. But Elena had become so accustomed to manipulating situations to her advantage that she assumed this would be just another obstacle to overcome with the right combination of charm and deflection. When Alexander turned to face his wife, Elena was struck by the coldness in his eyes. In 5 years of marriage, she had never seen him look at her with such detachment. The warmth that had always characterized their relationship was gone, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like the expression he wore when dealing with difficult diplomatic situations. Alexander gestured to a chair across from where he planned to sit, creating a physical distance that emphasized the formal nature of their meeting. As Elena settled herself in the antique chair, she began running through possible explanations for whatever had triggered this unusual summons. Perhaps there had been questions about her recent trip to Monaco, or maybe someone had complained about her redecoration of the East Wing apartments. The silence stretched between them until Alexander opened a leather folder and removed a thick stack of documents. Elena recognized the format immediately: financial statements, bank records, and transaction reports. Her carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment before she regained control, but that brief lapse was enough to confirm what Alexander had hoped was impossible. "I need you to explain these," Alexander said, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. He placed the first document on the coffee table between them, a bank statement showing transfers from the Children's Medical Research Foundation to an account registered under a company called Meridian Holdings Limited. Elena leaned forward to examine the document, her mind racing to construct a plausible explanation. She had prepared for this possibility, though she had hoped it would never become necessary. Years of maintaining her double life had taught her to think quickly under pressure and to project confidence even when facing overwhelming evidence. "I'm not sure what you're asking," Elena replied, her tone suggesting mild confusion rather than concern. "This appears to be a routine financial document. Perhaps you should discuss it with Sir Richard if you have questions about charitable accounting procedures." Alexander placed a second document on the table, this one showing Meridian Holdings transferring the same amount to a Swiss bank account registered in Elena's maiden name. The connection was undeniable, but Elena maintained her expression of puzzled innocence even as her heart rate accelerated. "The account receiving this transfer belongs to you," Alexander stated, his voice gaining strength as he moved from hope to certainty about his wife's guilt. "The money originated from a charity that provides funding for children's cancer research. I need you to explain how funds intended for sick children ended up in your personal account." Elena's first instinct was to deny knowledge of the account, but she realized that such a denial would be easily disproved. Instead, she chose a different strategy, one that relied on her husband's love and loyalty to provide protection from the consequences of her actions. "Alexander, you're frightening me," she said, allowing her voice to tremble slightly. "I don't understand why you're questioning me like this. If there's been some kind of mistake with the accounting, surely we can resolve it quietly without making it into a confrontation between us." But Alexander was no longer susceptible to Elena's emotional manipulation. The evidence before him was too overwhelming, and his training in recognizing deception finally allowed him to see through techniques that had worked for years. Instead of responding to her apparent distress, he placed a third document on the table. This document was Elena's personal credit card statement, showing purchases that totaled more than 3 times her official royal allowance. private jet charters, jewelry from exclusive boutiques, and payments to luxury hotels in cities where she had claimed to be conducting royal duties. The timing of these purchases correlated perfectly with the transfers from charitable accounts. Your spending far exceeds any legitimate source of income, Alexander continued, his prosecutorial tone reflecting his legal training. The only way you could afford this lifestyle is through the money you've been stealing from charitable organizations. How long has this been going on? Elena realized that denial was no longer possible, but she was not yet ready to admit defeat. Years of manipulation had taught her that even seemingly impossible situations could be turned to her advantage with the right approach. She needed to shift the focus away from her actions and toward Alexander's response to those actions. I can see that you've already made up your mind about my guilt, Elena said, her tone shifting from confusion to hurt indignation. You've been investigating your own wife like a criminal without even giving me the opportunity to explain. What kind of marriage involves hiring detectives to spy on your spouse? The accusation was designed to make Alexander feel guilty for uncovering her crimes, a tactic that might have worked in the early days of their relationship. But the magnitude of Elena's betrayal had fundamentally changed how Alexander viewed their marriage. He was no longer willing to prioritize Elena's feelings over the welfare of the institutions and people she had harmed. Alexander opened the leather folder again and removed a much thicker stack of documents. These represented months of investigation, hundreds of transactions, and millions of pounds that had been diverted from their intended purpose. The scope of Elena's crimes was breathtaking in its audacity and devastating in its impact. This investigation uncovered 17 different fake charities that you established over the past 3 years, Alexander said, his voice growing harder with each revelation. You've stolen over £8 million from legitimate charitable organizations. Money that was supposed to help children with cancer, protect endangered wildlife, and provide clean water in developing countries. Elena's carefully maintained facade finally began to crack as she realized the full extent of what had been discovered. She had assumed that her crimes were too complex and well hidden to be unraveled, but the documents before her proved that assumption wrong. Every transaction, every shell company, and every fraudulent charity had been traced and documented. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door, followed by the entrance of Sir Richard Pemberton and 2 people Elena did not recognize. Alexander introduced them as representatives from the Serious Fraud Office, the government agency responsible for investigating financial crimes. Their presence made it clear that this was no longer a private family matter. Detective Inspector James Crawford stepped forward and formally cautioned Elena about her rights, explaining that anything she said could be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, finally, forcing her to confront the reality that her actions had legal consequences that extended far beyond royal protocols. Elena's lawyer, whom Alexander had contacted despite his anger at his wife's betrayal, arrived within the hour. Margaret Whitfield was one of London's most respected criminal defense attorneys, known for her ability to navigate complex financial cases involving high-profile clients. Her presence provided Elena with professional protection but also confirmed the seriousness of the charges she faced. The meeting that had begun as a confrontation between husband and wife transformed into a formal legal proceeding as evidence was presented and statements were recorded. Elena, on the advice of her attorney, chose to remain silent rather than answer specific questions about her activities. But her silence could not undo the months of investigation that had exposed her crimes. As the legal formalities proceeded, Alexander found himself studying Elena's face, searching for some sign of remorse or acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. Instead, he saw only calculation, as if she were already planning her next move rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. This final realization that Elena felt no genuine guilt for her crimes made Alexander's next decision easier. Queen Isabella joined the meeting as it concluded, her presence adding constitutional weight to what had already become a criminal matter. The Queen's expression was grave as she listened to Detective Inspector Crawford summarize the evidence and explain the likely charges that Elena would face. Fraud, money laundering, and theft were serious crimes that would result in significant prison time if Elena were convicted. The discussion then turned to the constitutional implications of Elena's crimes. As a princess, Elena held titles and privileges that were granted by the crown and could be revoked by the crown. The process for removing royal titles was complex and rarely used, but the severity of Elena's crimes made such action not just possible but necessary. Queen Isabella explained that the Royal Council would need to convene to formally review Elena's titles and determine the appropriate response to her criminal activities. This body, consisting of senior royals and constitutional experts, had the authority to strip Elena of her royal status and remove her from the line of succession. Such drastic action had not been taken for over a century, but Elena's crimes represented an unprecedented threat to the monarchy's reputation. Elena listened to this discussion with growing alarm as she realized that she faced not just criminal prosecution but complete removal from the royal family. The titles, privileges, and social status that she had worked so hard to obtain were about to be stripped away permanently. Her daughter Sophie would lose her claim to royal succession, and Elena herself would become a private citizen facing serious criminal charges. The meeting concluded with Elena being formally arrested and taken into custody pending a bail hearing. As she was led from the palace in handcuffs, Elena finally understood that her crimes had consequences that no amount of charm or manipulation could overcome. The fairy tale marriage that had captivated the public was ending in scandal and disgrace. Alexander watched his wife's arrest from the palace windows, feeling a mixture of relief and profound sadness. The marriage he had believed in was revealed to be a lie, but the end of that lie also represented the beginning of a painful process of rebuilding trust in the monarchy. The investigation was complete, but the real work of recovery was just beginning. That evening, Alexander met with his mother and senior palace officials to plan their response to the crisis. News of Elena's arrest would break within hours, and the royal family needed to be prepared for the media storm that would follow. The scandal would dominate headlines around the world, but Alexander was determined that the monarchy would emerge from this crisis with its integrity intact. The Queen approved a carefully worded statement that acknowledged Elena's arrest while emphasizing the royal family's cooperation with law enforcement. The statement made it clear that Elena's actions were her own and did not reflect the values or standards of the monarchy. This message would need to be reinforced through actions as well as words in the days and weeks ahead. As news of the arrest spread through the palace staff and beyond, Alexander found himself facing a future he had never imagined. He was now a single father responsible for protecting his daughter from the scandal surrounding her mother's crimes. He was also heir to a throne that had been damaged by his wife's betrayal and would need to be restored through years of careful rebuilding. The emergency session of the Royal Council convened at dawn on a grey November morning, 3 days after Elena's arrest had sent shockwaves through the kingdom and beyond. The ancient chamber beneath Westminster Palace had witnessed centuries of constitutional crises, but few had carried the personal weight of the decision that now faced the 12 members of the council. Queen Isabella entered the chamber wearing the formal robes of state, her expression reflecting the gravity of a decision that would reshape the monarchy for generations. Beside her walked Crown Prince Alexander, whose haggard appearance testified to sleepless nights spent wrestling with the implications of his wife's betrayal. The other council members, consisting of senior royals, constitutional scholars, and representatives of parliament, had spent the previous days reviewing legal precedents and constitutional procedures that had gathered dust for over a century. Sir Edmund Hartwell, the Lord Chancellor and senior member of the council, called the session to order with the formal words that had begun such meetings for hundreds of years. But the weight of tradition felt different this morning, as the council prepared to exercise powers that had been theoretical rather than practical for most of their lifetimes. The evidence against Elena was presented systematically by Detective Inspector Crawford, whose investigation had become the foundation for both criminal prosecution and constitutional action. Bank records, forged documents, and testimony from unwitting accomplices painted a picture of systematic fraud that had operated under the protection of royal privilege. The stolen money totaled nearly £10 million, representing funds diverted from causes ranging from children's hospitals to environmental protection programs. But the financial crimes, devastating as they were, represented only part of the damage Elena had inflicted on the monarchy. Her actions had violated the fundamental trust between the royal family and the people they served, turning charitable giving into a vehicle for personal enrichment. The fake charities she had established had received donations from ordinary citizens who believed they were supporting worthy causes, only to see their money diverted to fund Elena's extravagant lifestyle. The council heard testimony from victims of Elena's crimes, including Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who directed a children's cancer research facility that had lost critical funding due to Elena's theft. Dr. Mitchell's quiet testimony about research projects that had been cancelled and treatments that had been delayed provided a human face to Elena's crimes that made abstract financial figures devastatingly real. Lord Justice Pemberton, the council's senior legal advisor, presented the constitutional framework for stripping Elena of her royal titles. The process was complex and had been used only twice in the monarchy's 1,000-year history, both times during periods of civil war when members of the royal family had committed treason. Elena's crimes did not rise to the level of treason, but they represented a different kind of betrayal that was arguably more damaging to the monarchy's modern role. The legal basis for removing Elena's titles rested on the principle that royal privileges carried corresponding responsibilities that she had systematically violated. Her position as patron of charitable organizations had provided both the opportunity and the cover for her crimes, making her abuse of royal status central to her criminal activities. The council had the constitutional authority to remove titles that had been granted based on marriage when that marriage had been fundamentally compromised by criminal conduct. Crown Prince Alexander addressed the council with a statement that balanced personal pain with institutional duty. He acknowledged his own failure to detect his wife's crimes while accepting responsibility for bringing the matter to the council's attention despite the personal cost. His testimony carried particular weight because he was both Elena's husband and the monarchy's future, making his support for severe sanctions a powerful statement about the royal family's commitment to accountability. Alexander's statement included a detailed account of how Elena's deception had affected not just the monarchy but his own family. Their daughter Sophie, now 8 years old, had begun asking difficult questions about why her mother was no longer living at the palace. The child's confusion and pain added another dimension to Elena's crimes, showing how her actions had damaged innocent family members as well as charitable causes and the monarchy itself. The council also heard from representatives of the charities that had been defrauded, including several organization leaders who had worked closely with Elena over the years. Their testimony revealed the sophisticated nature of Elena's deception, which had included staging fake events, hiring actors to pose as charity workers, and creating elaborate documentation to support her fraudulent organizations. Margaret Whitfield, Elena's defense attorney, was given the opportunity to present arguments against stripping her client's titles. She argued that the constitutional process should not proceed while criminal charges were pending, claiming that council action could prejudice Elena's right to a fair trial. She also contended that removing titles based on criminal accusations rather than convictions would set a dangerous precedent that could be used to punish royal family members for political reasons. But the council rejected these arguments after reviewing legal precedents and constitutional scholarship that clearly established their authority to act independently of criminal proceedings. The power to grant and revoke royal titles existed separately from the criminal justice system and could be exercised based on conduct that violated the trust and responsibilities inherent in royal status. The debate within the council reflected broader questions about the monarchy's role in modern society and the standards to which royal family members should be held. Some members argued for a measured response that would suspend Elena's titles pending resolution of criminal charges, while others insisted that the severity of her crimes demanded immediate and permanent action. Queen Isabella's intervention proved decisive in resolving this debate. Speaking with the authority of 60 years of public service, she argued that the monarchy's survival in the 21st century depended on maintaining the highest standards of integrity and accountability. Elena's crimes had not just stolen money from worthy causes but had betrayed the public trust that formed the foundation of royal legitimacy in a democratic society. The Queen's statement addressed the unprecedented nature of Elena's crimes and the equally unprecedented response they required. Previous royal scandals had involved personal conduct or political misjudgments, but Elena's systematic fraud represented a different category of wrongdoing that struck at the heart of the monarchy's charitable mission. The royal family's extensive involvement in charitable causes was one of their primary means of serving the public, and Elena's corruption of that role demanded a clear and decisive response. After 6 hours of testimony and debate, the council voted unanimously to strip Elena of all royal titles, privileges, and claims to succession. The decision was recorded in formal language that would become part of the constitutional record, establishing a precedent for future cases while making Elena's expulsion from the royal family legally absolute and irreversible. The practical implications of this decision were immediate and far-reaching. Elena would no longer be entitled to use royal titles, receive royal protection, or participate in official royal functions. Her diplomatic passport would be revoked, her official residences would be reassigned, and her name would be removed from the official record of the royal family. Most significantly, her daughter Sophie would retain her place in the line of succession as Alexander's child, but any claim Sophie might have inherited through Elena was permanently eliminated. The council's decision also required coordination with law enforcement to ensure that Elena's change in status did not interfere with criminal prosecution. Detective Inspector Crawford confirmed that Elena's loss of royal privileges would not affect the fraud investigation, and might actually simplify certain aspects of the case by removing diplomatic immunity considerations that could have complicated proceedings. News of the council's decision was communicated to Elena through her attorney while she remained in custody awaiting trial. Margaret Whitfield reported that Elena received the news with apparent composure, though she had privately expressed hope that her marriage to Alexander would provide some protection from the full consequences of her actions. The finality of the council's decision made it clear that no such protection existed. The decision was announced to the public through a formal statement issued by the palace press office that afternoon. The statement, carefully crafted to balance transparency with dignity, acknowledged Elena's crimes while emphasizing the royal family's cooperation with law enforcement and commitment to the highest standards of conduct. The announcement was accompanied by news that Crown Prince Alexander had filed for divorce, formally ending the marriage that had once been celebrated as a modern fairy tale. Public reaction to the news was swift and largely supportive of the royal family's decisive action. Opinion polls showed overwhelming approval for the decision to strip Elena's titles, with many citizens expressing appreciation for the monarchy's willingness to hold its own members accountable for criminal conduct. Editorial commentary praised the Queen's leadership during the crisis and Alexander's courage in exposing his own wife's crimes. However, the scandal also prompted broader discussions about royal finances, the oversight of charitable organizations, and the privileges associated with royal status. Some critics argued that Elena's crimes had been enabled by insufficient oversight of royal activities, while others questioned whether the monarchy should be involved in charitable work if such involvement created opportunities for abuse. Parliamentary leaders announced plans to review the regulatory framework for charitable organizations and royal patronage to prevent similar scandals in the future. These reviews would likely result in enhanced oversight procedures and clearer guidelines for royal involvement in charitable activities, representing one of the positive outcomes from Elena's betrayal. For Alexander personally, the council's decision marked the end of one nightmare but the beginning of another challenging period. As a single father and future king, he faced the task of rebuilding both his personal life and the monarchy's reputation while protecting his daughter from the ongoing consequences of her mother's crimes. The support of his family and the public's apparent understanding of his difficult position provided some comfort, but the road ahead remained uncertain. The evening after the council's decision, Alexander stood in his daughter's bedroom, watching Sophie sleep peacefully despite the chaos surrounding her family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they all adjusted to a reality where Elena was no longer part of their lives, but tonight provided a moment of quiet reflection on what had been lost and what still remained to be protected. 6 months after Elena's conviction and sentencing to 12 years in prison, the restored quiet of Ashworth Palace masked the profound changes that had reshaped the royal family and the monarchy itself. Crown Prince Alexander walked through the same corridors where the crisis had begun, but everything felt different now. The weight of scandal had been replaced by a different burden, the responsibility of rebuilding trust and ensuring that such betrayal could never happen again. The trial had been a media sensation that dominated headlines across the world for 3 months. Elena's defense team had tried every possible strategy, from claiming that she was manipulated by her business associates to arguing that her royal status made her unsuitable for ordinary criminal proceedings. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury's verdict was swift and decisive. Elena was convicted on 17 counts of fraud, money laundering, and theft, resulting in one of the longest sentences ever imposed on a member of a royal family. Alexander had attended every day of the trial, not out of loyalty to Elena but to demonstrate the royal family's commitment to justice and accountability. His presence in the courtroom sent a clear message that the monarchy would not hide from the consequences of Elena's actions or attempt to use royal privilege to shield her from legal responsibility. The image of Alexander sitting quietly in the public gallery while his former wife was sentenced became symbolic of the monarchy's transformation under crisis. The investigation that began with Sir Richard Pemberton's suspicions had evolved into the most comprehensive review of royal finances in the monarchy's history. Every charitable organization with royal patronage was audited, every financial procedure was examined, and new oversight mechanisms were implemented to ensure transparency and accountability. The process was painful and invasive, but it was necessary to restore public confidence in the royal family's integrity. Princess Sophie, now 9 years old, had adjusted to her new reality with the resilience that children often display in the face of adult failures. Alexander had been careful to explain Elena's absence in age-appropriate terms, focusing on the importance of honesty and taking responsibility for mistakes rather than dwelling on the details of her mother's crimes. Sophie's weekly visits with Elena in prison were supervised and brief, but they provided some continuity in a relationship that had been fundamentally altered by criminal conviction. The changes within the royal family extended beyond the immediate crisis response. Queen Isabella had used the scandal as an opportunity to accelerate modernization efforts that had been under consideration for years. Royal finances were now subject to independent audit, charitable activities were overseen by professional managers rather than royal staff, and new protocols ensured that no single person could control significant financial resources without oversight. These reforms were not implemented without resistance. Some traditionalists within the royal household argued that increased transparency would diminish the mystique and authority that had sustained the monarchy for centuries. But Alexander and his mother understood that 21st-century monarchy required a different relationship with the public, one based on earned respect rather than assumed deference. The investigation had also revealed systemic weaknesses in the oversight of charitable organizations that extended far beyond royal patronage. Elena's fake charities had operated successfully for years partly because existing regulatory systems were inadequate to detect sophisticated fraud. The government had responded by strengthening the Charity Commission and implementing new reporting requirements that made it more difficult for criminals to exploit charitable giving for personal gain. Alexander's role during the crisis had enhanced his reputation and prepared him for eventual succession in ways that years of traditional training might not have achieved. His willingness to expose his own wife's crimes, support criminal prosecution, and cooperate with institutional reforms demonstrated a commitment to duty that resonated with the public and political leaders. Opinion polls showed record-high approval ratings for Alexander personally and renewed confidence in the monarchy's future under his eventual leadership. The diplomatic implications of the scandal had been managed carefully to minimize damage to the kingdom's international relationships. Elena's crimes were serious, but they were clearly personal rather than governmental, and the royal family's decisive response had actually strengthened relationships with allies who appreciated the commitment to accountability and rule of law. Several foreign governments had privately expressed admiration for the way the crisis was handled. Elena herself had become a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of privilege and the importance of accountability regardless of social status. Her fall from princess to prisoner was studied in business schools as an example of how organizational culture and oversight failures could enable large-scale fraud. The case was also cited by legal scholars as evidence that modern democratic societies would not tolerate corruption even among their most privileged members. The financial recovery process had been surprisingly successful. Elena's assets were seized to provide restitution to the defrauded charities, and insurance policies covered some of the remaining losses. More importantly, the publicity surrounding the case had generated an outpouring of donations to the legitimate charities that had been harmed, with many organizations reporting that they were in better financial condition after the scandal than they had been before Elena's crimes were discovered. Alexander's personal recovery had been more complex. The betrayal by someone he had loved and trusted completely had shattered his confidence in his own judgment and forced him to confront painful questions about the authenticity of his marriage and family life. Counseling had helped him understand that Elena's sophisticated deception was not a reflection of his failure but rather evidence of her calculated manipulation of his trust and love. The divorce proceedings had been complicated by the need to protect Sophie's interests while ensuring that Elena could not benefit financially from her crimes. Alexander had sought custody of his daughter while agreeing to limited visitation rights that would allow Sophie to maintain some relationship with her mother despite Elena's imprisonment. The arrangements were designed to protect Sophie from the full impact of her mother's crimes while acknowledging the importance of preserving family connections where possible. Public interest in the royal family's recovery had remained high long after Elena's sentencing. Documentary programs, newspaper series, and book deals had explored every aspect of the scandal and its aftermath. Alexander had cooperated selectively with media coverage, participating in interviews that focused on institutional reforms and lessons learned while declining to discuss personal aspects of his relationship with Elena or his daughter's adjustment to the crisis. The annual state opening of Parliament, which took place 8 months after Elena's arrest, marked a symbolic turning point in the monarchy's recovery. Queen Isabella's speech, delivered with her traditional dignity and authority, acknowledged the challenges the institution had faced while emphasizing the reforms that had strengthened its foundation. The ceremony proceeded without any reference to the scandal, demonstrating that the monarchy's essential functions had survived the crisis intact. Alexander's own public engagements had taken on new meaning as he gradually resumed royal duties with enhanced credibility and purpose. His visits to charitable organizations now carried the weight of personal experience with the importance of financial oversight and accountability. His speeches about public service and institutional responsibility resonated more deeply because of the sacrifice he had made to protect those values during the crisis. The investigation had also sparked broader conversations about wealth inequality, privilege, and social responsibility that continued long after Elena's conviction. University lectures, policy debates, and social media discussions examined how society should balance respect for traditional institutions with demands for accountability and transparency. These conversations represented one of the positive legacies of a scandal that had initially threatened to damage democratic institutions. Looking toward the future, Alexander understood that his eventual reign would be shaped by the lessons learned during this crisis. The monarchy he would inherit would be more transparent, more accountable, and more closely connected to the people it served. These changes would present new challenges and opportunities, but they would also ensure that the institution could continue to evolve and remain relevant in a changing world. As autumn gave way to winter, Alexander found himself reflecting on the year that had changed everything. The pain of Elena's betrayal would never completely fade, but it had been transformed into something more valuable, a deeper understanding of duty, integrity, and the price of maintaining public trust. The monarchy had survived its greatest crisis in generations by choosing accountability over protection, transparency over tradition, and service over privilege. The little girl who fell asleep in her palace bedroom each night was growing up in a royal family that had been tested by scandal and emerged stronger. Sophie would inherit a legacy shaped by both her mother's crimes and her father's courage in confronting them. The choices made during this crisis would influence the monarchy for decades to come, ensuring that future generations would serve with the knowledge that royal privilege could never excuse personal responsibility. In the end, Elena's betrayal had forced the royal family to confront fundamental questions about their role and purpose in modern society. The answers they found through crisis and reform had transformed an ancient institution into something more honest, more accountable, and more worthy of the trust placed in it by the people it served. The fairy tale had ended in scandal and heartbreak, but the real story of duty, sacrifice, and renewal was just beginning.